You know, things just keep getting more and more fun right now. So Biden goes maskless and Dave Chappelle doesn't get canceled. What's going on in the world? And there's a showdown between Gupta and Joe Rogan in the mainstream news corral. It's Rob Nelson Live. Hey, I'm Rob Nelson. I used to host a show on Fox, and now I do a digital live stream called That Rob Nelson Live. And my whole mission is to figure out how, in this time of division, we can find common ground.
Speech, and they're not allowed to do that anymore.
No, I understand. It's up.
They be focused on rebuilding California.
Oh, it's so true. Come on. This is where this gets real.
He says you're heading.
I wouldn't want to be black and driving in a car.
Right.
Point there, right? Some of what's in this music, you can't sanitize it. All right, hey everybody, welcome to the show. Let's jump right in. As always, we're streaming to you, Crafty sharing to Facebook. We're on Reddit. We're on social platforms all around, and hopefully getting your feedback, interaction. It's always fun when we go at it. Busy week right now. So much to talk about. I'm not sure where to start, so I'm going to start with Dave Chappelle. I talked about Dave Chappelle last week. Dave Chappelle and his stand-up, making fun of trans people, and Netflix refusing to back down. Now, let's be honest. Netflix wasn't taking any moral high ground. Netflix was looking at the bottom line and going, we're going to make money off Dave Chappelle. That's simple. That said, there's an issue here. Dave Chappelle is a fascinating comedian. He is always, hey, Crafty, can you mute yourself? We're getting the clicking on your computer. All right. So Dave Chappelle has always been one who took things on. And by the way, if you read about Dave Chappelle like grew up like he was like a sensitive kid. He's like, I was always getting hassled, and his mom was like, it's okay. You know, comedy words became his way to fight back, right? Sensitive people don't like to hurt people. And Dave Chappelle's comedy has never been about hurting people. It's always been about shining lights on things. And humor does that. It makes fun of things. But here's the thing about Chappelle and the transgender community, why I'm starting with this. The criticism, I'm not defending Netflix. And I think Netflix is great for keeping them on, but let's be honest, you know, they're going to take something else down. They're not taking some bold stand for freedom and creativity, despite what they say. They're making a profit decision, just like everybody else. That said, I think the tide's turning a little. They're realizing there's profit in having somebody, a comedian, be allowed to be a comedian. And Dave Chappelle's a safe one in that he challenges everybody, takes everybody on, but, you know, he's not some like right-wing comedian, which, you know, would be easy for them to cancel. But here's the thing that struck me about Chappelle and the pushback from the transgender community. I want to read something that the former executive producer of that quit Netflix said. She says, Dave Chappelle is not, I'm sorry, this is the Netflix employee that quit. Dave Chappelle is not and has never been the cause of this problem. He's a symptom of it. That Chappelle believes the things he says and can say them with relative impunity is a result of the culture we live in, a culture that marginalizes and devalues trans people. He contributes to that culture in a very real way, but at least he isn't out there bragging about how many LGBTQ plus allyship awards he's won while he's doing it. What he can say with relative impunity, she says, is a result of a culture we live in that marginalizes and devalues trans people. And that's where I want to start with this, okay? Dave Chappelle wasn't marginalizing trans people. Comedy making fun of people is not marginalizing them. But we're in a climate where if you say certain things about certain groups, meant to be funny or not, even sympathetic to them perhaps in your real life, you are now marginalizing them. The very act of making fun of them is marginalizing them. Guys, that's not going to work. We're not going to make it in a society where you can't make fun of certain things because inherently you're marginalizing that thing by doing it. So you make fun of women, you're marginalizing women. You make fun of gays, you're marginalizing gays. You make fun of Asians, you're marginalizing Asians. You make fun of blacks, you're marginalizing blacks. Of course not. Dave Chappelle makes fun of black people. Is he marginalizing black people? By that logic, yes. By the logic of a society where we have created, you know, we have virtue signaling. We now have like a virtue culture. It's like you have to say and do the right things. And if you don't, you're inherently marginalized. You're inherently going against the virtue of the culture. It's a completely backwards way to look at speech, at communication, at free thought. The power in free thought is all about having it. Sidebar on this. There's a guy, Dr. Abbott, who's an associate professor at the University of Chicago. He's a climate scientist, and he's not an anti-climate change person. He's a legit climate scientist with legit views on how, climate change is destroying the world. He's highly respected. But Berkeley and MIT dropped him as a speaker. Why? Because he had a year ago made comments in his social media saying that he's speaking out against the rioting in Chicago after George Floyd's death. He called out rioting after George Floyd's death. And for that, a year later, Berkeley and MIT decide he can't come and speak about climate change, even though they wouldn't like what he says about climate change. He said the wrong thing in their eyes about what happened with the George Floyd protests. You can't criticize the George Floyd protests. You can't criticize the rioting. You could even be supportive of the protests and say, I don't like the rioting. That's not okay. Same as with Chappelle and the comedy. Not okay. You can make fun of, certainly you can't make fun of trans people. You're making fun of trans people, you're marginalizing them, which you're actually not. Nor if calling out rioting at George Floyd protests is not marginalizing the protests. It's calling out a behavior that's not okay. But we marginalize everything, right? We see it as a marginalization. If and it goes to the greater whole. It's no longer just about that thing. It's about, you're now doing this huge, big thing. So a climate change expert can't speak on climate change, even though you'd agree with his views, because he said something you don't agree with about George Floyd protests turning into riots. He didn't say something racist or whatever. He just called out the rioting. Interestingly, David Romps, who's the head of the Berkeley Atmospheric Sciences Center at Berkeley, quit because of this. And he quit because he said, basically, when we exclude people based on their politics, the politics of scientists, we're diminishing science. We're diminishing research. We're diminishing the free thought of science, not free thought in general. We're diminishing the ability for people to have a scientific debate. You're shrinking the scientific community that's allowed to contribute, not based on their scientific views, based on their political views. And I'm not talking even crazy radical political views. Just saying you thought the George Floyd protests in Chicago that turned into rioting wasn't okay to turn into rioting. Interestingly, Berkeley and MIT canceled Dr. Abbott's appearances. Princeton went ahead and booked him to do one. And they now have to expand the booking because they're like, we've gotten thousands of more people who want to come hear him, which is interesting because censorship has an inverse effect. It pushes it pushes up what you're trying to suppress. Whenever we're censoring, more people want to hear it. More people want to hear Dave Chappelle now that you're trying to censor him. More people want to hear Dr. Abbott talk about climate change now that you're trying to censor him. Seriously doubtful. Thanks for the tech note on our background is too distracting. We'll take that note into consideration and try a different background. We'll have less things going on in it. Although for you, many multi-visual people, maybe you like it, but I'm open to change. I've thought about that. Interesting sidebar. However, though, focus on the content. Look at me, not it. Don't watch the shiny balls. So all this leads also to me into a lot of hypocrisy that's going on. And we live in a society full of hypocrisy. That's no shocker. But I want to touch on a couple things that happened that I think are interesting. The first one is President Biden. President Biden with his maskless walk through his Washington restaurant. I love these. I love when the politicians do it. Whether it's explainable or not, it's always like somehow they have an explanation. So we have a short Instagram clip of showing President Biden strolling through a restaurant in Georgetown with the First Lady, Jill Biden. Crafty, can we see that little Instagram clip? There he is. Dinner with the president at Philo Marte. There he is. There they are. And everyone else has masks on. Okay, it's very short. Now, does it mean anything? I don't know, to be honest. Does it mean anything? Jen Psaki, the press secretary, said, he wasn't walking through the restaurant. He was leaving the restaurant. I love how everybody spins things. It's walking through the restaurant. The rule is you have to wear your mask going to your table, leaving your table, and and you take it off at your table. In some cases, some cities, you have to put it back on between bites. But you're leaving the restaurant. He's walking through the restaurant to leave. He's breaking the rule. Do I care? No, I don't care. I don't care. He's not giving anyone COVID. He's vaccinated. They're vaccinated. It's so hyper vaccinated and secure. Nobody's getting COVID. But the rule is put the mask on. And everybody else has the mask on. And all the staffers in the Secret Service, Biden doesn't. First Lady doesn't. Why? This is the part I don't get. Why? Well, somebody caught the shot, didn't see it coming. But again, they make the rules and then they break the rules. Even more shocking to me was Mayor Lightfoot last week at a WNBA game. She posted the photo herself. She's in a crowd at the arena. She's turned around facing the camera. Every single person has a mask on. She's got her no mask, not pulled down, no mask anywhere, and she's waving up to the camera. Lightfoot's been one of the hardest asses on this stuff. She's ridden people. We need to wear masks. You have to wear masks. It's for everybody's safety. You go into a crowded arena and you don't wear a mask and you smile at the cameras. Again, do I care that she did it? No, on the one hand, no. She's not giving anybody COVID. We have packed stadiums across the country every Saturday and Sunday for college and pro football. Most people aren't wearing masks. There's no super spreader event happening. Remember Fauci saying, I'm worried we are about to create super spreader events. It's terribly unfortunate that they're doing this stuff. Now we've seen it. We're almost, 6 games into football season. No massive spread. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people on top of each other's heads. I was at the Packers-Saints game in Jacksonville. No COVID spread. Wasn't happening. Now they're saying maybe it's because we're outdoors. Gee, shocker. You wonder? I said that like a year ago. Being outdoors seems like a good idea. But regardless, it's not the action. It's the rule that seems hypocritical. Well, that seems not just the rule doesn't seem hypocritical. Breaking the rule is hypocritical. The rule itself seems overbearing. Like it's just politics at this point. And I might have mentioned before, I spoke with Dr. Monica Gandhi, who's a professor and the head of infectious diseases at University of California, San Francisco, a respected disease expert. And she was, part of Biden's COVID summit. The American Medical Association has her on often as a spokesperson to talk about vaccination. She's big on massive vaccinations. And I asked her about masks, and she did some of the early mask studies last year. And she said at this point, and she's a liberal, and she's pro-vaccine, and she's pro-mask. And she said, masking has just become a virtue signal at this point. She's like, there's not a lot of masks work, but we're not doing it based on science anymore. We're doing it based on politics. A reaction to Trump. Trump went one way, now we're going the other way. And it's just politics. And she's like, as a doctor, as a scientist, it makes me crazy. I'm not against masks, I'm for masks. But I'm not going to pretend that all our mask rules somehow make sense. So masking up everywhere clearly isn't working or isn't necessary. Maybe it worked before, but it's not necessary. We do it anyway. You're vaccinated. You're double vaccinated. You're triple booster shot vaccinated. You still got to wear a mask, and everybody around you does too. We're all vaccinated. We're all wearing masks, and no one's going to catch COVID. Hopefully, someone takes a mask off, we all drop dead. No, of course not. I don't care that Mayor Lightfoot or President Biden took their mask off. I care that they continually insist we all have to do it. We must, or we're jeopardizing our fellow man. We're clearly not. Doctors and scientists are acknowledging that. It's become virtue signaling. I'm in LA right now. People wearing masks outside on their bikes. They are not going to get or give COVID on their bike. It's just become an identity politics. And I hate it when the people who make those rules or perpetuate them or push them, break them blatantly and act like it doesn't mean anything. It's the hypocrisy that bothers me. Kyrie Irving, the Nets superstar, won't get the vaccine. It means he won't play basketball this year. Too bad if you're a Nets fan. And he said, I'm not getting it. It's my choice. And I said before, all these athletes who don't want to get the vaccine, guys, you got to think about it. I mean, I don't care what you say. These athletes have access to the best doctors in the world, the best doctors in the world. They only care about their bodies, as do their teams. They have to be high-performance machines. So many of them don't want to get vaccinated. Why? What are their doctors telling them? They're telling them, we don't know. The vaccine maybe won't hurt you, maybe will. We don't know. What we do know is COVID, you'll be fine for the most part. You know, you're all super healthy. And a lot of athletes who've gotten the vaccine say that they feel more sluggish now when they're playing. They feel like it pulled something down out of them. That's not, you know, a scientific double-blind study, but that is observational. But, you know, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, you know, the old school, you know, Laker, former Milwaukee Buck, as Lou Alcindor, you know, jumped all over Kyrie Irving and just basically called him stupid and selfish. He's stupid and selfish for not wanting to get vaccinated, jeopardizing his teammates. And again, it's back to this virtue thing. And I go, they're all vaccinated. They're all vaccinated. He's not going to kill them. Even if they do get COVID, because he gets COVID, they're not going to go to the hospital. They're not going to die. We know. It was like 2 breakthrough, I don't know, the number is ridiculously low, the number of people with breakthrough infections who've died. And they had super comorbidities. People who are vaccinated aren't getting COVID and going to the hospital, nor are they dying. So you're going to get a cold. But you can't say it. The climate where you can't say certain things. It's not just that you can't make certain jokes. It's not just that Dave Chappelle can't joke about trans people because he's marginalizing them. You can't speak certain things about COVID because you're marginalizing the truth about COVID. I mentioned before, I talked to a prominent ER doctor who would not go on record saying this, who said, there's no sick people in my ICUs in a big major city, liberal, 2 hospitals, no sick people, healthy people coming into my ICUs with COVID. It's people with serious comorbidities. And who said, herd immunity will come if people get it. Young people get it. Let them get it. Now, other doctors have said, how dare he say that? What he's saying is, the point is, you're going to, you know, but the more interesting point he made to me was, these booster shots were acting like you can't get COVID. It'll kill you. COVID's just a bad cold if it doesn't kill you. I mean, if it's going to put you in the hospital, that's bad. But if you're vaccinated and you get a mild case of COVID, you're going to be fine. You're going to get a cold. We're trying to keep anyone from getting anything. But we're back to like the virtuing. You're not allowed to say it. Kyrie Irving's selfish to refuse to get a vaccine, even though all his teammates are forced to be vaccinated. So they're all going to be fine. If he gets COVID, and he'll be fine. But they might somehow get a breakthrough COVID and be fine too, but it would be his fault. It's the virtue signaling that bothers me. What's happening, though, is we are creating a backlash. And that's where I'm going with this. A backlash is slowly coming. And it's coming in the form of anger and frustration. And I believe the trigger was vaccine mandates. People dealt with masks. People dealt with mask mandates. Even though some of them seem stupid and hypocritical. I always joke, throughout the pandemic, I flew. You got to have a mask on everywhere, but then they sat a person in the seat right next to me for 4 hours. It's like, really? Seriously doubtful. I did not say an employer does not have the right to mandate vaccines. I'm calling him out for calling Kyrie Irving selfish. I do believe employers have certain ability to mandate certain things for the safety of their workforce, and they are private employers. I have a problem with the federal government mandating, and it goes way beyond this vaccine. And every single person out there, in my view, should be concerned about the federal government telling you you need to put something into your body or you mustn't. And again, you know, back to the choice thing with, you know, people say the connection to like abortion and the vaccine is like apples and oranges. It's not. It's 2 different things about the government telling you what has to happen with your body. In one case, they say it's for the safety of society, which is, again, debatable. You know, herd immunity can come through 2 things, vaccinations and natural infection. And so many people have had COVID. And, you know, that's the strongest immunity there is. We're going to see that debate coming more and more. And I've interviewed some people on it. Natural immunity, once you have the disease, is utterly powerful protection. But the choice and abortion thing is you know, the argument against it from people who are pro-life is you're killing you're killing an innocent life. We have to protect that life. The notion that the government tells you what to do with your body to protect others, I don't buy. I'm not supportive of it. To mandate something that I don't believe they've proven is completely safe or inherently necessary at this point. And, you know, Delta Airline CEO saying, we're not doing a mandate, but we are finding compliance by simply asking people, but giving some people the option to opt out. You don't need everyone to be vaccinated. Kyrie Irving doesn't have to be vaccinated. If you believe the vaccination program is effective, and it is to some extent, again, it's not bulletproof. We're vaccinating into a pandemic, which is, never going to succeed. You're behind the disease, and the variants will mutate out of the vaccine. It's a narrow vaccine and spread, but you'll still have protection. You don't need to have everybody have it. You need to have the vulnerable have it. Young, healthy people can get COVID, do get COVID, and they're 100% fine. We know that to be true. That's not misinformation. There's a misinformation campaign to stop people from saying that. But go ask your own experts who are, go ask child, pediatric ER doctors. I've talked to them. I've talked to some of the best on both sides of this argument, epidemiologists. They all say kids have an incredible strength against this disease. They don't get super sick. Less than 500 kids died in the last year and a half from COVID. That's less than the flu to proportional time frame for the flu 2.5 years ago. It's not a kid killer. So again, the notion that everyone has to have a vaccine for this to be okay, no. But if you believe most people are going to get it or half the people will be okay, don't force everyone else to. But my point really isn't about whether or not going to the idea of autonomy and liberty. My point is most people, I think, in this country resist being told to do something, especially when it comes to their body. And we are seeing masks were okay. To a degree, people fought and people did stupid things. Those idiots who'd go in and punch someone because they told them to put a mask on. Just put the mask on. Just put the mask on. Just who cares? Just be a good citizen. Be a good neighbor. Put the mask on. You don't think it's working. It's not going to kill you. Put it on. Do your shopping. Take it off when you're in your car. But vaccine mandates have pushed a different button. And we're seeing that anger coming in a lot of pushback from workers. Now, it's interesting. You can view this one of two ways. Seriously doubtful. Thanks for all the comments. I didn't say this vaccine's not been proven safe in the short term. I've said it has been. We're also seeing I said it hasn't been proven safe in the long term. And I've made that argument before. It's simple common sense. You can't know if it's safe in the long term because it hasn't been around for the long term. Most drugs approved by the FDA, and I went through this process making a documentary about a highly controversial drug that was saving kids' lives who have a deadly disease called spinal muscular atrophy. And the FDA didn't want to give the parents the drug for their kids who were going to die otherwise because they didn't know the long-term efficacy of the drug. And the parents were like, I don't care. My kid's not going to have a long-term efficacy to worry about. Give them the drug. We'll take our chances. The FDA didn't want to. They wanted more time to study the safety of the drug. Typically, FDA drug approvals can take 5 to 10 years to study long-term effects of a drug. We don't know the long-term effects of the vaccine, and there are indicators that suggest there are problems. I'm not saying it hasn't been effective in the short term. It's particularly valuable for those who are elderly or have comorbidities, who are at high risk, but forcing a healthy population that largely can survive COVID with minor problems, not hospitalization even, is to me absurd. So that's all I'm saying. Not that it's been effective or safe in the short term, but that we don't know the long term. And people have a right to make a choice about the long term. What do I want my body in the long term? Will it affect my fertility in the long term? Will it affect my heart? Will it affect my lungs? Will it affect my brain? And we do know mitochondriosis is happening. I mean, we're not, the US is a little blinded on this. Many Scandinavian countries and Britain, and studies are all over the place on this, show that heart inflammation in teenage boys is 6 times higher from the vaccine than the risk of getting severe COVID. And they're not vaccinating teenage boys because of it. They're pushing back and saying, wait, they're not likely to get heart inflammation. It's not common, but it's 6 times more likely than to have a serious effect from COVID. So COVID would be better. So that's all I'm saying. Let's just open our eyes to it. But my real point here is to the mandate and to what it's doing socially. We're seeing a pushback. That's my point in this. Now, argue the details. Am I right or wrong about the vaccine, this or that? The pushback is coming, and we're seeing it in a lot of workforce stuff. Now, either that or it's just coincidence. 10,000 workers strike at John Deere. 1,400 workers strike at Kellogg. 32,000 nurses in Southern California, nurses in clinics, hospitals and clinics, are threatening to strike. And Elizabeth Hawkins, who's the negotiator for the nurses, said, my nurses and healthcare professionals are angry. You hear this a lot. American airline pilots are picketing. Remember, pilots can't strike. It's against the law for them to strike. But they can protest. And they can also call in sick. You really believe Southwest Airlines went all askew and sent off thousands of flights off track because of bad weather in Florida? If you believe that, you should go buy the swampland in Florida. I was in Florida. I don't know, the hurricane missed me. Orlando was supposed to be, Tampa and Orlando were like terrible weather. Really? Because nobody in Tampa or Orlando noticed the terrible weather, and every other airline took off and landed just fine. Southwest was like bad weather, bad weather. It was not bad weather. If there was, it was for like 2 hours. Everybody else was fine. Southwest problem wasn't bad weather. They lied. And most of the media let them lie. They didn't say it was true. They said that's what they say. They didn't. It was pilots and crew, mostly pilots, not taking sick and saying, I won't fly. Now, was that because of the vaccine mandate, or was it about something else? It's coincidental, perhaps, that all these companies, all these industries are seeing strikes coming and threatening strikes, just as they're doing vaccine mandates. Now, my theory is the unions are smart. They're taking advantage of an opportunity. It's a sort of the last straw, and they're going, let's use this as a bargaining chip. And let's not say it's about the vaccine. Some are, but let's just say it's about all kinds of things. But what comes through in all the unions, if you look at what they're saying, they say it's not just about wages and benefits. It's about quality of life. And vaccination is a piece of that. I really believe the vax mandate is pushing people, a lot of people at a lot of levels in a lot of industries, to go, no, you've crossed the line. You're not firing me if I don't get that vaccine. It's authoritarian. You were worried about Donald Trump being authoritarian. And that's as authoritarian as you get. And yet the media just continues its dual narratives and the lies. I want to play a clip. The hypocrisy and the stuff goes on and on with the media. I mean, Katie Couric just coming out and admitting that she omitted stuff that Ruth Bader Ginsburg said to her about the national anthem protesters because she didn't want former Justice Ginsburg to look bad. She's a liberal icon. I liked her. I admire her. I didn't want her to look bad. So I'm not going to keep in where everything she said bad about because she called out the protesters and was like, basically, kneeling national anthem is dumb, stupid, and, is offensive and goes against the very thing that made, America. Your grandfathers and parents benefited from what this flag stands for. Don't disrespect it and kneel. Katie Couric admits she left it out of the interview when it was said because she didn't want Ginsburg to look bad. Journalism's so selective these days. When I saw, it's not new, by the way. I was on 60 Minutes years ago, and I interviewed I was with David Gergen in the White House, and 60 Minutes was in there. David Gergen was one of the top assistants to Clinton. And 60 Minutes afterward, they noticed this thing they didn't like, the Gergen's people behind him on the wall that really was embarrassing, making fun of other presidents. And David Gergen picked up the phone and called the producer of 60 Minutes and said, take it out. And they took it out. I mean, power is power. There's no objectivity. There's no fairness. There's power. And we forget the danger of power. And this is what I'm building with all this power. Vax mandates are an exercise, an unbridled, unabashed, unthrottled exercise of power over a population. It should scare you no matter what they're vaccinating you for, if it's a mandate for everybody. But media stopped covering Florida's COVID cases. Did you notice that? Florida, the bad state of Florida, where everything's bad and COVID was on the rise and DeSantis is killing people. Because COVID cases 50% down in the last month and a half in Florida. Do you see that being covered in the news? Because it would go against the notion that lockdowns and masks all work. But a perfect example of the hypocrisy to me came with CNN's coverage on ivermectin. And you can argue what you want about ivermectin. You can argue it's effective, it's not effective. There's debate on both sides. I've seen proof that it's effective. Many people have said it is. There are many small studies that show it's effective. No big double-blind clinical studies, but those are expensive, time-consuming, and typically funded by pharmaceuticals who don't want to fund a study that shows a repurposed drug, a drug that's no longer going to make them any money. It's not being used for what it was originally used for, is worth doing a study on. So they're going to blow that away. But there's a debate about whether ivermectin works or doesn't work against COVID. What there is not is a debate about whether ivermectin, when you get it, is taking horse dewormer. And if you remember, CNN went crazy with everybody taking horse dewormer. Everyone's taking horse dewormer. And Joe Rogan, went on his podcast and said Dr. Corey had given him a protocol that included ivermectin, and CNN ran the banners. Joe Rogan takes horse dewormer to fight COVID. And they did the news. Joe Rogan takes horse dewormer to fight COVID. Joe Rogan had Dr. Sanjay Gupta on the Joe Rogan Experience. 3 hours. It's worth watching if you haven't. But here's a Instagram clip of the exchange where Rogan confronts Gupta on CNN saying he took horse dewormer. Dr. Gupta is the chief medical correspondent for CNN.
I'm missing.
Do you think that's a problem, that your news network lies?
Well, I don't.
Dude,
what did they say?
They lied
What did
and
they
said
say?
I was taking horse dewormer. First of all, it was prescribed to me by a doctor.
Yeah.
Along
they
with
shouldn't have said
a
it was
bunch
horse.
of other medications.
If you got a human pill, because there were people that were taking it, the veterinary medication, and you're not, obviously. You got it from a doctor, so that it shouldn't be called that. Ivermectin can be a very effective medication for parasitic disease. And as you say, it's probably, I think a 250 million people have taken it around the world.
More,
I get that.
Way more.
So
way more. Billions of people have taken it.
Can I just come back to the one I want to talk about? Two things on
you
the
have
ledger.
You have, before we get to that, does it bother you that the news network you work for out and out lied, just outright lied about me taking horse dewormer?
They shouldn't have said that.
Why did they do that?
I don't know.
You didn't ask? You didn't think that was you're the medical guy over there.
I didn't ask. I should have asked before.
But they
coming
did
on
it
your
with
podcast.
such glee.
So it's fun, and their exchange covers a lot of ground. But here's my point. Dr. Gupta doesn't even pretend. I think he's lying. I think he knew what they said. He's like, I didn't know. And Rogan's like, you didn't know? You didn't ask? You're the chief medical correspondent. It was all over. There's all over there. The lower thirds, it was like a story for 2 days. But the point is, Gupta doesn't pretend and go, yeah. He goes, you're right. They shouldn't have done that because you didn't take horse dewormer. You took an ivermectin pill designed for humans. And whether you think that's effective as a treatment against COVID, it's not going to hurt you. It's not going to kill you. It's used widely for other things. It's repurposed, from a parasitic drug, and doctors are prescribing it for COVID. It may do nothing, or it may be a miracle drug. I've talked to doctors and patients who say it worked a miracle on me, but that's not the point. It's not hurting you. And for CNN to perpetuate that lie because it fits their agenda is back to the power thing. We are reinforcing a pattern of much of the media reinforcing what the power structure wants you to believe and drilling it down your throat. And good for Joe Rogan for calling it out, and good for Dr. Gupta for not, maybe he lied a little and say they didn't know, but being like, no excuse. They should never have said that. You didn't take horse dewormer. Ivermectin is a widely used drug. But you know what? Most people didn't know that. Most people, if you'd asked them when that story came out, had no idea ivermectin is a widely used drug. Because it's a widely used parasitic drug. It's not used as much in the U.S. It's used in much of the world as a parasite fighter. It's billions of people have taken ivermectin. One of the most widely probably prescribed drugs in the world to date. It's been utterly successful. The line, the hypocrisy. I don't even care about picking on the media. I care that they're reinforcing. They're reinforcing a power structure. Power is dangerous when it consolidates. And that scares me. Jon Stewart went on with Jake Tapper on CNN, and they had a great conversation. Jon Stewart's back with his show. I don't know if you ever remember watching The Daily Show. Jon Stewart was just great, right? Remember Jon Stewart's days when when talk show hosts late night and the whole thing were funny, right? I mean, now most of them are just a joke. Like, they're just parodies. They just say it's the same thing. They say the comedy, Bill Maher doesn't. They say the comedy they're allowed to say. And Greg Gutfield doesn't. He's on Fox, Maher's on HBO. But most of the late night show comics, they say the comedy they're allowed to say. That's it. Like, you can't say certain things. It won't be okay, right? That's the thing with Dave Chappelle. You're not allowed to say it. Can't say trans people, make jokes about trans people. Dave Chappelle, by the way, is not transphobic. And if you actually watch the whole special, the whole underlying part of the story is his story about a trans comedian who's a friend of his who ends up dying, and so it's sort of a weird ode to her. So it wasn't meant to hurt trans people. But my point is, most comics aren't funny. Jon Stewart these days, and most late night shows are just boring because they have the rules of what they can be funny about. Say what your audience wants to hear so they clap and laugh. Again, reminiscent of like communist China comedy, but old school communist China, back when I lived there years and years ago. But that said, Jon Stewart had a gift at it, and he's become much more political, and he's very liberal. There's no question. Jon Stewart is an is extremely liberal, but he's extremely smart and he's thoughtful, and he always has been. And Jake Tapper pushes him on, how dangerous this whole thing is with the Republicans. Republicans buying the big lie, and Republicans buying into Trump still, and how dangerous this is, and authoritarianism, and we're going downhill with this. And now you got Trump endorsing secretaries of states who believe in the big lie. And when does it end? And, Stewart kind of laughs and kind of makes fun of him. And it's kind of like, geez, like, calm down. But then he says this, which is just such an insightful comment about the obsession with Trump and the divisiveness that caused.
I think we make a mistake focusing this all on Donald Trump as though he's, I don't know, Magneto and some incredible supervillain that has changed the very nature and temperature of the United States. But I think it's a mistake to focus it all on this one individual. Mm-hmm. And not to focus it more on, the idea that power is its own reward, whether it be in the financial industry or in government. Like, power doesn't seed itself.
It's an interesting point there. And by the way, producer Crafty told me I've been staring above the camera, so I apologize if you guys think I was looking up to heaven or at some thing above my head. Now I'm looking right at you. I can't see necessarily what you see. So, power doesn't seed itself. Jon Stewart's absolutely right. Okay, I'm going to backtrack for 1 second. Seriously, Doubtful, and I'm not. You're putting a lot of comments up, which I love. Just can't respond to them all, but I appreciate every one of them. We don't know the long-term effects of ivermectin. Well, we do and we don't. We don't know the long-term effects of multiple uses of ivermectin. However, you're not going on an ivermectin thing where you're using it for long periods of time. It's a short protocol. We do know ivermectin does not have long-term side effects. It's one of the most widely used and widely trusted drugs in the world. It's been used, as I said, throughout the world as, for various parasitic diseases. And it's been highly effective in stopping the spread of parasites. Again, not as much in the US because we don't have that problem, but throughout much of the world, the vast populations of the world that are less developed have used ivermectin for years and years and years. It's highly effective. It's highly safe. Everybody knows that. Dr. Gupta knows that. That's why he said it. You're right. 250 million people, and it's more than that, have used this drug, and it's been completely fine. 250 million, yeah, and it is higher than that, actually, the numbers. You can do your research on ivermectin. But anyway, back to the real point here, which is not about the drugs, guys. It's about power. And Jon Stewart's so insightful in saying, why this obsession with Trump? And he talks before in the interview about it, we have social media platforms that literally reinforce your most crazy notion. If you have a little bit of a radical inkling, social platforms are going to find that. And as he puts it, send you a manifesto, like it explodes it. But his point is, Trump may have been a great vessel. Trump may have been good at doing it, but he's hardly the beginning. He's carrying on something that's existed long before him, and the culture and the technology and the way information moves and the way social platforms have spread information to us based on what we like and don't like, reinforcing it. The hyper AI algorithms that figure it out and drill into you only what you want to see, so you don't believe anything else. That's not me making it up. That's a fact. That has created this terrible buildup. And he talks about Stewart talks about how when you've marginalized one group, meaning the right, enough and discredited them enough, they're going to react with violence. He talks about violence is built into our culture, into our society, into our history. He points out we had a civil war. This notion that it's all about Donald Trump triggering something and a bunch of Republicans jumped on board and a big lie and there's your problem. He literally, talking about Trump as if he is, again, some arch villain with all this power. He's not. He's the boogeyman, and the obsessive holding on to him misses the bigger point, which is power doesn't seed itself, as Jon Stewart says. And that's why I'm worried when I watch the Biden administration continually clamping onto its power in his completely offensive and an indulgent way as Trump did. Biden is in some ways no less autocratic than you think Trump was. He refuses to answer questions to the press for the most part. He turns and walks away. It's tightly controlled what he says when he says it. They've created a fake White House set across the way in the old executive office building. Kamala Harris does a space video with kids who are actors who audition. They feed the propaganda they want fed. They limit what you can see, and then they spin everything. Afghanistan wasn't a crisis. It was the withdrawal that had to happen. Oh, sorry, no, didn't have to happen. I've interviewed military experts. It didn't have to happen that way. What didn't have to be a chaotic mess? There were plenty of options to avoid that. No, it was great. And the bombing, the terrorist bombing, well, see, that's all the more reason why we had to get out when we did. No. The bombing didn't have to happen. And by the way, the drone strike, remember how quickly we forgot the drone strike that killed an entire family that they then for 2 weeks said was a righteous strike and the right thing when they knew 5 minutes later they'd blown up a family? Doesn't it bother you? Doesn't it bother you that our government blew up a family in Afghanistan trying to get a terrorist and knew 5 minutes later that in their rush to judgment to make a point that they were retaliating, they got a family instead, of all things, a guy who works for a U.S.-based aid organization, and they lied about it for 2 weeks? Don't you think they didn't know? No, I've told you if you watch my show, they knew, because I knew through channels that the guy who made the call. But of course they knew. They didn't admit it till the New York Times figured it out. The New York Times figured it out. The military knew instantly what they did. They knew 5 minutes later. What I've heard is they knew 2 minutes before, but they didn't take the call with the guy saying, don't fire the strike. He's not a terrorist. But they knew 5 minutes later and lied for 2 weeks till they got caught. Doesn't that bother you? And the border's not a crisis. Do you know, remember Trump's stay in Mexico, remain in Mexico policy? Biden said it was inhumane. We're getting rid of it. He's bringing it back. Very quietly, they're bringing it back. And they just don't account. There's no accountability. The economy's a mess. No, it's great. It's great. This is how it needs to be. Inflation's good. Inflation's a high-class problem. Says a top Biden official. Really? Oh, welcome to the world of the middle class. Inflation's a high-class problem. Right. And then COVID. They're making a mess on COVID. And you talk to scientists, doctors from any perspective, and I've talked to many of them who might be considered more mainstream, more non-mainstream. They all acknowledge that the messaging on this from the government has been disastrous. And it was disastrous under Trump, and it continues to be disastrous under Biden. And they selectively listen to the scientific organizations when they want to. It's all politics. That is all mismanagement. It is all lies. It is all lack of transparency. And it is coming from a president who promised transparency and directness to be the anti-Trump, and he is being the little Trump. That should bother you. Vaccine mandates. Whether you think vaccines are good or not, we are moving closer and closer to herd immunity with a 50% vaccination rate. We are getting massive amounts of natural immunity from all the people who've been infected with COVID. And that's why you're seeing stadiums full of people in every city all weekend long and not having massive outbreaks of COVID in hospitals overflooded and ICUs buried, because it's not happening. But ordering the remaining 50% or 47% or whatever to get vaccinated is no longer about public health. It's about power. And as Jon Stewart said, power doesn't seed itself. It aggregates itself. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. All the king's men, based on Huey Long, the senator who almost became president running against Roosevelt before he got assassinated. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. We should be scared of power. We should restrict power. That's what our government, our entire Constitution was built on. I don't care if you're left, right, center, independent, libertarian, power, concentrated power is dangerous. And we want to deconcentrate it. Vaccine mandates are a form of concentrated power, and they should scare you. Encouraging vaccinations, that's a whole different thing. As the Delta CEO said, we're doing it. We're getting there. We're at 90%, but we're not ordering a mandate. And you will see the anger and the pushback coming. It is going to keep coming as long as we keep having an overreach of our government. And you should be scared of that overreach across the board. An administration that is not transparent, but opaque. that spins everything as if it's very Trump-like, everything worked out the way it should, instead of owning their mistakes, that continually lies to us and hides things as long as they can, and then is aggregating more and more and more and more control. That, if it doesn't scare you, I think it should. It scares me. I'm Rob Nelson. Thanks for watching.